Today we're going over the Frenzy Barbarian guide as seen on Maxroll. This is for patch 2.5, ladder season 2. So this added the Sunder Charms and the Terror Zones. Now, let's get into it. So the Frenzy Barbarian is going to be dealing magic and physical damage. These two combinations of damages allow us to farm pretty much anything in the game. It's really good for group play, also solo, and it's good for magic find, keys, getting runes, doing Ubers, all that stuff. Overall though, it is a C tier build. That doesn't mean it's bad though, it's just in comparison to some of the other builds in the game. This guide does assume that you are already level 75, so if you aren't level 75, you can go check out the link that leads to Teo's Barb leveling guide. There will also be a link below. This build does have an Uber variant, as we mentioned earlier. It is very fast paced with high mobility and plenty of gear options as well. It is gear dependent though with those gear options. It is a bit repetitive because you are just pretty much left clicking. It can also feel a bit clunky with the amount of speed that this character has. Now for 2.5, we added the Sunder Charm section as well as the Terror Zone section. For the Sunder Charm, use Bone Break. Now this is going to make it so we don't run into any physical immunities at all. However, it does make it so we do take increased physical damage from enemies. This does have a varying roll of 10 to 30% increased damage, which can be a little bit of a hefty hit for us. To optimize use of Bone Break, we have to use Grim Ward to lower the enemy physical resistance even more, as well as amplified damage and decrepify. Atma's Scarab and Reaper's Toll are also fantastic sources of this. To counteract the negative part, we're going to be using Crown of Ages. We can also use String of Ears as well. Now you don't actually need to use the Sunder Charm for this build because we have Berserk, which deals magic damage, and if you put enough points into Berserk, it'll actually make it so Frenzy does some magic damage. However, that's how I would build it. The places that are best for us are going to be areas with quick access and some target to kill. Council members, the Eldritch Pindle Skin, elite packs that are constantly around the area. Now the worst areas are the inverse of that, which basically means trash mobility, immunities, and not a whole lot of monsters to actually take out and then use item find on. For the Frenzy Barbarian, this build actually takes a lot of skill points to fill out correctly. There's actually a couple ways to do it, but the way we do it here is we have 20 points into Frenzy, 20 into Double Swing, 20 into Blade Mastery, 20 into Battle Orders for survivability. Now this could actually also go into Taunt for the additional damage on Frenzy, but then we put the rest into Berserk. For the 1-point wonders, we use Battle Cry, Find Item, Grim Ward, Shout, Battle Command of course, Increase Speed, natural resistances, and then leap attack and leap for some mobility. You can always read more about these skills if you would like to down here as well. For our attributes, we're going to be putting enough points in strength and dex for our gear. The rest of it goes into vitality because energy, we have enough mana stolen per hit through our gear. As we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of gear options for this build, and it depends on how you really want to build it. Main stats you really want to focus though are in teal, and that is going to be attack speed, enhanced damage, ignore target's defense so you can actually keep hitting the monsters, crushing blow, and deadly strike. Those are going to be your main things. For the rest of the build, we're going to be using all skills, barbarian skills, make sure we have attack rating, faster cast rate on swap is nice to be able to move from place to place, things like Hodo. And then we really need to make sure that we have some source of Canopy Frozen on your gear somewhere. Whether it's through a Ravenfrost or some other piece of gear, you have to have Canopy Frozen. As I mentioned before, you are pretty much unstoppable when it comes to the farming spots. The main thing that you want to focus on for these farming spots is that you can navigate them cleanly. Quick access is also fantastic, and then you pretty much have no immunities. Our Mercenary actually plays a pretty important role for us as a Might Reaper's Toll Mercenary. He not only gives us Might Aura to increase our physical damage, but he also gives us a source of Decrepify through his Reaper's Toll. This will break physical immunities and decrease the amount of physical resistance of monsters that are already broken. In addition to his Reaper's Toll, he's going to be using Fortitude and Indariel's Visage with a Ral rune to make sure you don't have that negative fire res. For the playstyle, we're going to be using Frenzy to gain a bunch of stacks, and then we're going to use Double Swing against single target. Double Swing does have faster attacks than Frenzy, however it might not have as much damage. So if you're going to be using Crushing Blow, then Double Swing actually might be the play. Leap and Leap Attack are great for navigating through large distances before you have Teleport. Leap also keeps monsters stunned and keeps the area safe. If you use Battle Cry at the beginning of a fight against bosses or anything, it also makes your fights a lot easier. This isn't as much required when you have a ignore target's defense source, but against bosses, it still is super relevant. Be careful not to override your Mercenary's Decrepify though, because that's going to deal a lot more damage. When you get the opportunity, use Grimward to deal additional damage. The only thing is that the monsters will run away a little bit, but you are pretty fast as your Frenzy Barbarian, so you should be able to catch them pretty much no problem. As we mentioned before, Berserk is probably the best way to take care of immunities, but you can actually use Bone Break to sunder all the enemy physical immunes. This puts them to 95 resistances, as we talked about before. Use Grimward, Amp Damage, and Decrepify in combination with all this. Make sure when you start each run that you're going to be using Battle Command, Battle Orders, and Shout. Also, if you have Enigma or a teleport source, make sure you are repositioning your Mercenary to make him effective and be able to get those decrep procs off on your enemies. If you don't have teleport, places like entrances or waypoints can be really good to be able to reposition your Mercenary a little bit. You can even use town portals, but that one is a little bit slower. Now, because we have legs like the Roadrunner, we don't really need a huge amount of faster cast rate. All I'd recommend hitting is probably 63% on swap, which is very easily done with either 2 Wizard Spikes or 2 Hodos. Now, because I recommend Grief, all you need to do is make sure that Grief itself actually rolls 32 IAS, and you're at max breakpoint. If not, you just throw some piece on and you're good. Faster hit recovery isn't too required because we are a tanky boy, but if we hit 27 FHR, that's going to help us for sure. On hardcore, all you need to do is make sure you have overcapped resistances against Conviction. We use things like Crown of Ages, Verdungos, and Thunder Gods to keep us alive against lightning damage and against physical hits. Obviously, Storm Shield here is a mistake because you can't use Frenzy and Storm Shield. Make sure I get that fixed. Now, as I mentioned before, this build is pretty gear dependent. So the budget version does start off with a little bit of an expensive build. It's not too bad, but I would recommend using 2 Oaths. You could also use Unbending Wills if you wanted to as well, but I highly recommend using 2 Oaths. Balrog Blade Ethereal is what I typically like to use, using attack speed gloves with any resistance as you can get. Angelic Pieces are fantastic for more attack rating so you can continue hitting the monsters. String of Ears and Ravenfrost are great to be able to add damage reduction and cannot be frozen. Any type of resistance boots that doesn't have to be Eldurs. IK boots are cool as well. Treachery is pretty cheap and we can use that for its fade procs, as well as any jawbone cap that we can throw lore in is pretty cool as well. The rest of our gear is just going to be resistances, and then on swap we're going to use Warcry throwing knives. Now, because we're on a budget rather than a full starter, we can actually afford things like Treachery, Talrasha's Mask, and then of course we can just use Insight because that's super cheap and will do a bunch of damage. Now, because every playthrough can vary a little bit and you might not have things like an Oath Sword, you might have an Oath Axe or something else. So the Blade Mastery here could actually become Mace Mastery or Axe Mastery, whatever it might be, in order to actually fit your needs. So be aware of that. Don't put the points into Blade Mastery blindly if you don't have a sword. The main points that we really want to focus on are going to be Frenzy, Double Swing, that specific mastery you need, Battle Orders, and Berserk. Going over the standard gear, we have Dual Grief, Ariat's Face, Enigma, you could also use Fortitude, High Lord's Wrath, we got Gores, Ravenfrost, String of Ears, a Mana Leech Ring. This part is actually pretty important to be able to sustain our mana using Frenzy. Then probably the best gloves in the game are Laying of Hands. It is so strong against demons. Then for the charms, we're going to be using max damage. They don't have to be perfect 420s, Vape Nation, but anything will do. Obviously a Geed's Fortune, Annie, and Barb Torch to keep your survivability, and some Magic Find. For the Magic Find variant, we're going to be using Last Wish, which happens to be the most expensive rune word in the entire game, but it gives us a bunch of Magic Find based on level and a bunch of other things. We're going to be using a Cham rune in our helmet in order to make it so we can use a Magic Find ring instead of a Ravenfrost. Any type of cold damage here is not necessarily what we want, so we can actually use Item Find and the bodies don't turn into icicles. The charms turn into a little bit less max damage, but also give Magic Find. The Mercenary changes a little bit as well. We're going to be using an Act 5 Mercenary with Lawbringer, G-Face, Treachery. The G-Face provides Crushing Blow, and he'll still be able to proc those decreps. The Uber variant isn't too different from playing a hardcore setup. We're going to be using Last Wish, Grief, Crown of Ages, Chains of Honor this time to be able to get that extra resistances after a Fade proc, Barbarian Amulet, Ravenfrost, T-Gods, Wisp Projector to absorb some of the lightning, Gores for that Deadly Strike, Open Wounds, and Crushing Blow, and then for extra survivability, we're going to be using Dracul's Grasp. Resistance charms here are very good, and then any extra damage is welcome, but definitely not required. Survivability is key here first, and Crushing Blow is going to be your main damage regardless. To summarize the 2.5 Frenzy Barbarian, we're going to be using enough strength and dex to wear our gear, with the rest going into vitality. We want to make sure we keep up our buffs all the time, and we use teleport and leap to move around. Generate frenzy stacks first, and then use double swing for big single target DPS. Don't forget to utilize Grimward when it actually makes sense to be able to do additional damage. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the guide. I will catch you in the next video. You're all beasts.